If you agree that courage doesn't retire, like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear is the kind of story they'll never put in the manuals. It began with a sealed metal trunk in the corner of a dusty airfield office, one no one had touched in years, until the morning the padlock broke, and someone finally pried it open. Inside, beneath a layer of oilcloth, were flight gloves so worn they'd molded into the curve of someone's grip, metals no one at the airfield could even name, and a letter, crisp despite its age, signed by a general whose name was still whispered in flight schools. That was the first crack in the picture people thought they had of Mara Kincaid. Before that day, to most of the folks at Shiloh Regional Airfield, she was just the girl in ops, late 20s, quiet, polite enough, a limp in her left leg she never explained, and a habit of showing up before dawn to check weather logs no one else read. She worked the desk in the control building, kept coffee hot, and filed the endless flight plans for private trainers and their wide-eyed students. On paper, she was barely more than background noise. Not a pilot, not security, not anything that would make you look twice. Even the mechanics, good men mostly, dismissed her as someone too young to have seen much and too pretty to be out here in the wind. But there was one thing none of them ever noticed. Every lunch break, Mara would disappear. She didn't go to the break room, didn't sit in her car. She climbed the narrow ladder bolted to the side of Hangar 2 and sat on the roof with her journal, scanning the horizon with that still, fixed gaze you only see in people who know how to wait. She could pick out a Cessna by engine pitch alone. She could tell a bird strike from a crosswind shear without looking up. But no one asked how. No one wanted to. Until the day the wrong kind of wind came to Shiloh. It was supposed to be a standard Tuesday, clear skies, a crop duster or two on the schedule. Maybe a military trainer passing through for refuel. By mid-morning, a half-dozen flight school cadets were out on the tarmac, running their pre-checks under the lazy supervision of a contractor named Watts, a man who liked to lean against the hangar door with a clipboard and a smug grin. Mara was inside, finishing an equipment inventory, when the first unfamiliar vehicles rolled up the access road. Matte black SUVs, no markings, their windows dark enough to swallow the sunlight. The men who stepped out didn't bother with greetings, just black tactical gear, eyes hidden behind polarized glasses, rifles slung low. Operations lockdown. One of them barked to Watts before flashing credentials so fast no one could read them. Everyone inside. Now, you could hear the change in the airfield immediately. The chatter from the cadets fell silent, the whine of engines winding down into uneasy quiet. Mara moved toward the door, but the lead man stopped her with a sharp gesture. Inside the hangar, ma'am. His tone made ma'am sound like a cage door. She didn't argue. She stepped past him, taking the stairs two at a time until she was back in the operations office, her eyes flicking to the windsock outside. Full, steady, out of the south. The sound came next, a deep, deliberate thrum, distant but growing. Not the smooth whine of a training craft, but the muscle of a bird bred for war. She knew it before she saw it. UH-60, maybe modified, the kind of gunship you don't bring to a friendly pickup. Through the warped glass, she spotted it cresting the tree line, rotor wash kicking up a halo of dust over the fields. And just like that, the airfield's puzzle clicked in her mind. The SUVs, the lockdown, the fact they were herding everyone into the hangar instead of dispersing them. Whoever these men were, they weren't here to protect anyone. They were here for someone. And the chopper was their ride out. Down on the tarmac, she caught sight of Eli, youngest of the mechanics, the only one who ever really talked to her, being shoved toward the hangar with the others. He looked over his shoulder just once, eyes locking on hers through the high office window. She gave the smallest nod, the kind you only make when you've already decided what you're about to do. In the far corner of the office was the ladder to the roof, technically off limits, but she'd made it hers months ago. She climbed fast despite the limp, emerging into open sky just as the gunship dropped lower, its nose angled toward the far end of the tarmac. Rotor wash hit her in the chest like a wave, hot and relentless. The roof shuddered beneath her boots, but she kept moving, her stride steady, every step paced with the calculation of approach speed and crosswind. 10 years ago, she'd been the one behind the stick in aircraft like that, and you never forget the math. The helicopter banked slightly to avoid the hangar, giving her the angle she needed. She crouched low, fingers flexing once. and in the space between two rotor beats, she moved. A flat-out sprint across the corrugated steel, the hangar edge rushing up, the sky suddenly wide open beneath her. Witnesses would later swear she didn't hesitate, didn't flinch, didn't even look down. Mara Kincaid just leapt. She hit the air in a clean arc, boots slicing through rotor wash so thick it rattled her teeth, and for half a second gravity almost won. But then her hands locked around the gunship's side rail with a soundless snap, fingers burning against sun-heated metal, body swinging with the pull of the craft's momentum. The door gunner's eyes went wide, a split second of disbelief before training kicked in, but Mara's was faster. Her knee drove up under his armor plate, stunning him, and her elbow came down hard across his jaw, sending him tumbling into the safety harness and out of her way. The crew chief inside barked a curse, reaching for the M4 slung at his chest, but she was already in motion, hauling herself through the open bay with a twist that put her behind him, one arm across his throat, the other yanking the weapon free. Out, she growled into his ear, and something in her tone, low, flat, certain, made him obey. He stumbled toward the open door, and she pivoted, eyes scanning the instrument cluster. The pilot was shouting, hands locked on the cyclic, but Mara slid into the co-pilot seat like she'd never left it, boots braced, her own hands closing over the controls. "You're not taking anyone," she said over the comms, voice calm in the storm. The pilot turned to lunge at her, but the butt of the M4 caught him across the temple, and he slumped sideways, headset askew. In the hangar below, the black-clad ground team had frozen mid-movement, staring up at the chopper that had just become their worst problem. Mara didn't hesitate. She rolled the gunship hard left, rotor blades chopping the air in a tight bank that whipped dust and loose papers across the tarmac, bringing the nose around until the hangar filled the cockpit glass. Through the wash, she could see Eli at the hangar's side door, shielding a group of cadets behind a stack of crates, his expression a mix of terror and something else, recognition. She leveled the craft, dropped altitude until the skids nearly kissed the asphalt, and hit the loudspeaker. Run. Now. The hostiles inside had to choose. Keep their weapons up or dive for cover against the hurricane-force wind tearing through the open doors. They chose wrong. Eli moved first, waving the cadets out into the open as Mara swung the bird in a slow, covering arc, her finger tight on the trigger of the side-mounted minigun. Not firing. Not yet. But making damn sure no one mistook her intent. Over the comm, static cracked, and a voice she hadn't heard in years cut through. "Kincaid, is that you?" For the first time since her boots left the hangar roof, she allowed herself the smallest smile. "Roger that," she said. "I still on the tarmac. And I'm bringing them home." The roar of the rotors drowned out everything but the pounding in her chest as Mara brought the gunship down into a hover between the fleeing civilians and the black-clad operators scattering for cover. Dust and loose gravel pelted her windscreen, the airfield a blur of motion below, but her mind was still, calm in a way that only comes to those who have lived with danger long enough to make it part of their breathing. One of the hostiles bolted toward the SUVs. She snapped the nose of the chopper toward him and tapped the trigger just long enough to carve a burst of warning into the asphalt, the ricochet snapping him back into cover. She kept the craft low and mean, rotor wash battering the hangar doors until the hinges screamed, and over the loudspeaker her voice cut through like steel wrapped in velvet. "No one leaves with them. No one." Eli and the cadets made it to the far fence line, where an airfield truck was already barreling up to haul them to safety. Only when the last one was aboard did she pull the chopper into a climb, swinging out over the tree line. The ground team, suddenly without their ride, their plan in tatters, stood marooned in a haze of dust. She banked once, hard, and put distance between them and the runway before throttling back toward the open tarmac, where a convoy of green Humvees had just rolled in. Soldiers spilled out, weapons at the ready, but the moment they saw who was in the pilot's seat, they didn't raise a single barrel. Instead, one man in Desert 10 flight gear stepped forward, removed his helmet, and just stared. His voice came through her headset, ragged with disbelief. "Captain Kincaid." It had been years since anyone called her that. Years since she'd worn the wings that now lived in the bottom of a locked trunk. She set the bird down with surgical precision, the skids kissing the asphalt, and powered down the rotors. When the blade slowed enough for the noise to drop, the man stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers like he was seeing a ghost. "We thought you." She cut him off with a small shake of her head. "Not today." Around them, soldiers moved to secure the airfield, cuffing the stranded hostiles, checking on the cadets. The man turned to the nearest MP. "Get command on the line. Tell them the Falcon Rider is back in the air." The name rippled through the unit like a live current. Some of the younger troops didn't recognize it, but the veterans did, and their posture changed instantly. Falcon Rider, the call sign of a pilot who'd once pulled off a midair seizure of an enemy chopper in hostile territory. A maneuver so dangerous it had been stripped from training manuals because no one else could survive it. Mara had done it twice. She stepped down from the gunship, her limp more pronounced after the strain, but her eyes steady. Eli approached from the perimeter, still wide-eyed, still trying to reconcile the quiet ops clerk he'd known with the woman who had just hijacked a war machine mid-flight. "You were," he started, but couldn't find the words. She glanced past him to the cadets, all staring like they'd just watched something out of a legend, and simply said, "I was ready." Within an hour, the field was clear, the hostiles loaded into armored trucks, and the gunship was back in friendly hands. The colonel in charge tried to get her to stay, to debrief, to explain why she'd been hiding in plain sight. But Mara only returned the helmet to him, brushed a layer of dust from her sleeve, and nodded toward the operations office. "I've got paperwork waiting." She walked away from the crowd, past the trucks, past the soldiers still whispering her name, up the steps to her desk as if nothing had happened. Later, Eli found the old trunk in the corner of the office, the lock now hanging open. Inside were the gloves, the medals, and the letter from the general. The paper yellowed but the ink sharp as the day it was signed. To Captain Mara Kincaid, for actions above and beyond the call of duty, in defiance of odds and gravity alike. At the bottom, a single line in handwriting, "For the day you fly again." Word spread fast. New cadets arriving at Shiloh would hear about the quiet woman in ops who once leapt from a hangar roof, seized a Gunship Midair, and turned it into an escape ride. They'd climb the ladder to that roof, stand in the same spot, and try to picture the moment she stepped off the edge. Some swore you could still feel the hum of rotor wash in the metal. And those who had been there didn't bother to argue, because they knew some leaps don't just carry you through the air. They carry you into legend.